What's up, y'all? Roy here, and you're listening to the Clemens with a Z podcast. So, I want to talk to y'all about something funny that happened this week. Last week I wrote a Substack article called it "I'm Not a Harbor Wall," and it was my response to an Instagram reel that had really gotten under my skin. I published it. I started reading it. Kind of thought I was done with it. Well, then a couple days ago, I went and saw Toy Story 5. I know, yep, you heard it, Toy Story 5. And this isn't a movie review, although I really enjoyed it. I did. But somewhere between all the ridiculousness of the movie and getting unexpectedly emotional during a couple of scenes, I started to think about that article again. Then I had one of those moments where you realize, oh, I don't think I finished that thought. Y'all ever had that happen? Like you think you've landed on something, maybe you hit publish, you move on, and then life has this way of handing you the other half of the story. Well, that's what happened to me. Because while I'll stand by everything I wrote in that article, I realized that I'd only really done half the work. I deconstructed something and I hadn't reconstructed anything yet. And one thing I've noticed about myself over the past few years is, well, yeah, I love deconstructing. Maybe that's because I spent so much of my life inside systems where that wasn't allowed. You couldn't question anything. So when I finally started asking questions, it felt freeing. I know most of y'all probably feel that as well, necessary even. But I'm also realizing something. Eventually, you do have to build. Eventually, you stop asking, what do I no longer believe? And you start asking, what kind of person do I actually want to become? And that's what today's episode is really about. I don't think this episode is about masculinity, fatherhood, at least not primarily. I think it's about something much bigger. It's about what happens when we spend our lives measuring ourselves against ideals and what happens when we finally stop. So let's start with that reel that kicked all of this off. So you have this guy, and he's talking about his wife and daughter. He's speaking softly, he's wearing a white hoodie. The music is emotional, the visuals are beautiful, and then he describes himself as the harbor wall, the steady thing, the strong thing, the thing that absorbs the waves when they come crashing in. And the waves and the ocean currents are his wife and his daughter. And honestly, there was this part of me that liked it in the beginning. I don't want to pretend that I hated it from the beginning. I understood what he was reaching for. I want to be present for my kid. I want to be present for my wife. I want to be steady when the people I love are struggling. Those are beautiful desires. So why did it bother me so much? Couldn't figure it out for days. And that's the funny thing about ideas. Like sometimes your body notices something before your brain does, right? Have you all ever had that happen? You're listening to someone talk, you're reading a book, watching a movie, and something in you just goes like, like not because you know it's wrong, it's because you know something doesn't quite fit. And that's where I was. Then I realized it wasn't the metaphor, it was what the metaphor quietly assumed. Because nobody says men should suppress vulnerability. Nobody really says that anymore. Instead, they say, be the harbor wall. Nobody says your emotional life is a problem. Instead, they say, be the steady one. And nobody says if you're struggling, you're falling short. Instead, they paint a picture, and the comparison happens automatically. And that's what I think bothered me. Not because I think this guy had bad intentions. I think he was trying to describe the way he loves his family, and I can respect that. What bothered me is what happens when the rest of us watch it. Because we don't just hear his story, we quietly start asking ourselves, is that who I'm supposed to be? And that's where I started thinking about my own life. Because I've spent a lot of my life standing next to ideals: the ideal Christian, the ideal disciple, the ideal husband, the ideal father, the ideal man. And for a long time, I assumed that if I didn't fit the picture, the problem was me. Because here's the thing, I've always been emotional. I struggle with anxiety. I cried. I sit in therapy. I wrestled with religious trauma. But somewhere along the way, I picked up this quiet question. Is there just something different about me? Not wrong, just different. I found myself wondering, what do we do with all the anxious men, or the father who cries, or the husband working through religious trauma, or the boy who feels things deeply? Is he failing at masculinity, or is he simply being human? And honestly, I think that's the question here that started this whole journey. Because a couple days after I went and saw Toy Story 5, and first of all, I do want to acknowledge how weird it is that an animated movie about toys can absolutely wreck a grown man, okay? I mean, here I am, 45 years old. I'm laughing 1 minute, and then the scenes later, I'm sitting there trying to blink the tears away before anyone notices. But honestly, I wasn't embarrassed. If anything, I found myself grateful. Because as I sat there, I had this really unexpected thought. I hope I never lose this. And I hope I never lose the ability to laugh this hard, to be moved by a story, to feel wonder, to cry when something beautiful happens. And then almost immediately, another thought followed it. The thought was, I hope my son can do with this as well. And that's when everything started changing for me, because I realized my issue with the harbor wall wasn't just about masculinity, it was about humanity. I started to wonder, if I spend my whole life trying to become the harbor wall, would I slowly stop letting myself experience the full range of being human? Would I start believing my job was to always be steady, always be composed, always be the one carrying everyone else? Where do those emotions go? Where does the grief go? Where do the tears go? Where does the fear go? Because if the metaphor only has room for me to be the wall, then all of those other things have to go somewhere else, right? Because I think that's why it hit me so hard, because I've spent years learning that my emotions weren't enemies. They weren't problems to be solved. They weren't signs that I was failing. They were signs that I was alive, that I loved, that I cared, that I was paying attention. Sitting there next to my son, I realized something. I don't want him to inherit a version of masculinity that teaches him to shrink his humanity. I don't want him wondering if tears are something to hide. I don't want him thinking stories should stop moving him once he becomes a man. I don't want him believing that maturity means becoming less affected by life. Because honestly, I don't think maturity looks like feeling less. I think maturity looks like becoming secure enough to feel more. I think maturity is laughing when something's funny, crying when something's sad, grieving when you've lost someone, standing in awe when something beautiful interrupts your day, being fully present to your own life. And as I was thinking about all of this, I realized I'd only written half the story back with the Harbor Wall article. I knew what I didn't want to become. I still hadn't answered the question, what did I want to become? And that's when one word kept coming back to me. Not the wall, harbor. So I get home from this movie and I'm thinking about all of this, the real, my son, the article I just written, and then this thought just kind of landed in my head. Maybe the problem was never with the harbor, maybe it was with the wall. And I actually laughed a little at this thought because I was thinking like, well, that would have been nice to realize before I hit publish. But that's isn't that how growth kind of works sometimes? You think you've reached the end of the thought and then life hands you another piece of it. So I began thinking about the harbor, and the more I thought about it, harbor isn't beautiful because it's strong, right? Harbor is beautiful because it's safe. Think about why ships come into a harbor. They don't come because they've conquered the storm. They come because they've been through one. Some arrive with dents, some arrive exhausted, some arrive barely holding together. Harbor doesn't inspect them first. It doesn't ask, why did you get so beat up? It doesn't say, come back after you fix yourself. It simply receives them. And that's the part that really got me. Because I don't think I've spent my life looking for walls. I think I've spent my life looking for harbors, places where I didn't have to perform, places where I didn't have to pretend, places where I didn't have to earn belonging, places where I could show up with all my questions, griefs, doubts, anxiety, joy, my whole self, and know I was still welcome. And then I realized that that's the kind of father I want to become. Not a father who's always the strongest person in the room, not a father who never cries or who always knows the answer. I want to be the kind of father whose presence says you don't have to pretend here. You don't have to earn your place here. You can bring me the storm because I won't love you less. And here's what's really beautiful. Some days I'm going to be the harbor, right? But some days I'm going to need one. We all do, right? And I hope my kid knows that too. Because I don't want to just teach him how to offer grace. I want him to know it's okay to receive it. And I think the more and more that I was crafting this episode and thinking about it, I just realized that, I don't know, like, this really isn't just a fatherhood episode, or at least it's not just one. Because if you think about it, every one of us is looking for a harbor somewhere. Some of us are looking for it in a spouse, maybe a church, maybe in friendships, maybe in therapy. Some of us have been looking for it our entire lives. Because I think every human wants to know one thing. If I show you who I really am, will you still stay? I think that's the question underneath almost everything. If you knew my anxiety, would you stay? If you knew my doubts, would you stay? If you knew my shame, would you stay? If you knew the thoughts that keep me awake at 3 in the morning, would you still want to know me? And if I'm honest, I think that's been one of the biggest themes of my own healing. Not learning how to become someone else, learning that I don't have to hide the person I already am. Because for years I thought healing meant becoming less emotional, less anxious, less messy, less complicated. Now I think healing looks more like finding people who don't make me hide those parts anymore. That's a completely different journey. And that's why I keep coming back to the story of the prodigal son. I wrote an article about it and I did a podcast recently. Talked about it before. It's the thing that gets me about this wasn't just that the son came home. It was the father. The father ran. Doesn't make his son earn his way back. He doesn't let him finish his speech. He doesn't say, "We'll see if you've changed." He just receives him. I don't know, like that feels like a harbor to me. And honestly, I think that's what I hope this podcast continues to become. A place where people can wrestle with questions without being afraid. I hope it's a place where people can disagree without disappearing. I hope it's a place where people can bring the parts of themselves they've been told are too much and discover they aren't too much at all. Maybe that's why I keep coming back to these conversations. Not because I have it all figured out, but because I know what it's like to spend years wondering if you're too emotional, too doubtful, too different, too broken, then you're too much. And I don't want other people spending decades asking those questions if they don't have to. I think that's maybe what a harbor really is. Not a place where perfect people gather, a place where imperfect people stop pretending. And maybe that's what home has been trying to teach us all along. So maybe that's where I want to leave this today. I started this whole journey because of an Instagram reel. Then I wrote an article. Then I watched Toy Story 5. Somewhere along the way, I realized that life had handed me the other half of the story. I still don't want to become the harbor wall. I don't want to spend my life trying to become another ideal, another image, another metaphor that no real human can fully live inside. But I do hope to become a harbor, not because I'm always strong, or because I always know what to say, or because I'm the guy who never struggles. I hope my presence just becomes a place where the people I love can exhale, where my son knows he never has to hide his tears, where my wife knows she doesn't have to carry everything alone. where my friends know they can bring the parts of themselves they've been afraid to show. And honestly, I hope I keep finding harbors too, because I have learned something over the years. Some of the strongest people I know aren't the people who never need anyone. They're the people who know how to receive love as well as give it. People who know how to come home. So that's what I hope for you today. Whether you're a dad, mom, single, married, religious, not religious, I hope you find people who remind you that you don't have to earn your belonging. I hope you find relationships where you don't have to perform. I hope you can laugh loudly. I hope stories still move you. I hope music still gives you goosebumps. I hope you cry when your heart needs to cry. I hope you never become so afraid of looking weak that you stop feeling deeply. And maybe, just maybe, as you become more fully yourself, you'll become that kind of presence for someone else. Not because you've got life all figured out, but because people leave your presence feeling a little more human than when they arrived. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Clemens with a Z. If something in this conversation resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at clemenswithaz@gmail.com or send me a DM over on Instagram at Clemens with a Z podcast. If you want to support the podcast, the easiest and quickest way you can support it is by subscribing, rating, and leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with a friend, post it on your socials, drop it in a group chat. All of it helps more than you know. If you want to support the podcast financially, you can head over to theclemenswithaz.com. There's a merch store with shirts, stickers, all kinds of stuff. You can also donate directly through the GoFundMe that I've created. The link's in the show notes. Every little bit goes a long way in helping me keep these conversations going. Another way to support the show, or if you're looking for something a little bit more regular, you could subscribe to my Substack, Devotions for the Disillusioned and the Deconstructing. This is another platform where I share short reflections, devotionals, and some extra behind the scenes thoughts that don't always make it onto the podcast. This podcast keeps going because of listeners like you showing up, engaging, and passing it on. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And thanks for being a part of this messy middle with me. So until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.